Roberta with AV Ultra, and today I'm going to be talking about the Adobe Media Encoder. Now that doesn't sound too fancy, but I promise it's something that you're probably going to end up using one way or another when you're editing or producing video or working on VFX using After Effects. Typically, if you are in Premiere Pro, you might have something that looks like this, right? Maybe not exactly like this. Maybe you weren't at an airport shooting some stuff in slow motion, but you get my point. When you are ready to export something, you have a couple options. If I just go to my File, Export, Media, this is the dialog box that you typically see. Here we have our window here, we have our settings, and if I go ahead and I pick what I want here, so I'm just going to go create one of my presets I've put together here before, it's kind of laid this all out, and I have a couple options right down here. My first option is Q, and then my second option is Export. If I hit Export, and that's typically what I've done before the Adobe Media Encoder, here's what happens. I'll hit Export, and now Premiere Pro is locked down. I've in the past just waited for this to happen. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to stare at this for about an hour and 49 minutes, probably open up some other website. And I've noticed that my timer is going up and I'm already frustrated. I'm going to hit cancel because I'm going to freak out and I'm going to miss my deadline, and it's just not going to work out very well. It'd be great if instead of Premiere locking down, I can send this away to a queue and let it render when I'm done for the day or when I can take a break and I don't have to use my computer right then and there. All right, so that's been canceled out. And now instead, I'm going to go ahead and I am going to hit Q. And when I hit Q, that is actually going to open up the Adobe Media Encoder here in the background. You can see it's already popping up there. And the Adobe Media Encoder is what I like to refer to as a renderer and a batch exporter. It's very comparable to Compressor from Apple, and it's often overlooked by a lot of people, and it really shouldn't be because it's a huge time saver for me and teams that I tend to work with. It lets me pretty much work from anywhere the way I have mine set up and helps me time manage my projects. When we are wanting to launch the Adobe Media Encoder, you just saw I was able to launch the AME from Premiere. I can also do that right from After Effects, I believe. And I can also launch it as a standalone app. So if you have Creative Cloud, you have the Adobe Media Encoder already. If you don't have it installed, just go up to your cloud icon up here and go to it, and you can see you can go ahead and install or open it right then and there. What exactly are we looking at when we are in the Adobe Media Encoder? Now I've just made this full screen so we can see exactly what's going on here. So why the hell should I use this thing anyway? Now, what if I need to send one copy to my boss to review, but you don't want to send a whole 1080p file over and you just want to send a small piece for overview? Or what if you also needed to send one over to your sound guy so he can start mixing some sound effects or clean up some audio, etc.? What if you have another VFX team or even just somebody else to do the color work and they need a copy too? So you're not just pushing out one copy anymore. And if I'm back in Premiere and I go to my file export here, Command M, I'll have to hit export once, change my settings again, hit export again, change my settings, hit export a third time, change my settings. And each time I'm going to have to wait for that to render over and over and over again. That's not really a good use of my time. What if you aren't doing anything fancy, but you just need an archival high quality copy and a copy that you can throw onto YouTube? Point is, anytime you're rendering more than one copy at a time using Premiere's export feature, you're basically waiting for one to finish so that way you can start the next render. It lets you export in the background so you can keep working, or if you have multiple copies, you can render them all out in a batch and send them to various places with various settings. In fact, you can even have them posted straight to YouTube and Vimeo as well as FTP right through the AME, saving you steps of having to open up a browser, log into something, etc. So let's take a look at this interface of the Adobe Media Encoder, or really the lack thereof. there's not a lot going on as far as an interface for the Adobe Media Encoder. We only have a series of panels here. If you take a look, we just have these 4 quadrants really. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and just make that a little bit bigger so it looks like 4 quadrants here. All right, so in our top left, we've got our cue, and right now you can see that's the file that I just plopped in there. And at the bottom here, we have encoding. To the top right, we have our preset browser, and then on our bottom here, we have something here called a watch folder. So in our top left corner here, we have our cue, and again, this is that Premiere Pro project I just sent over by hitting Command M, and instead of hitting export, I hit Q. And what it's doing here is it's telling me it's ready to go. It's going to be a QuickTime file. It's going to be at that 1080p ProRes at 60 frames per second. And it's going to output it somewhere. Now, I didn't tell it exactly where to output, so I'm just going to put this on my desktop right now. Okay. So right now, it's going to go right onto my desktop. So nothing is going to happen here until I hit the Start Queue button. And once I hit that Start Queue button here, you're going to notice right here at the bottom, we have our output preview, and that's in our encoding window. And it's giving us a sample of the frame that's playing back right now and what's rendering, how much time it's going to take to render, and a synopsis of what exactly it's doing. So right away, I know that this is based on my 1080p ProRes 60 frames per second. And I have this set up in 1920 by 1080, progressive, Apple ProRes 4444, no bitrate available, and the audio is uncompressed. I can go right back into Premiere, even though that's rendering. Let me cancel out of this, and I can continue to work on some other projects here. So for example, I've got this other project here. This is at 1080 at 60. That's loading up. Maybe I'm talking about the color panel here, and I'm doing another demo. But notice I can continue working in my Premiere Pro project, even though in the background here, the Adobe Media Encoder is cranking away. And it's still giving me a timeline of exactly how long this is going to go. Now that's great. What if I have multiple projects I want to throw in here? Well, in that case, maybe I've got this other project right here. I'm just going to throw this in here. And I'm going to just go ahead and hit Command M to export. And right now it's rendering here, just showing me the preview render. And I can go ahead and I can queue this too. So I'm just going to pick a different preset here really quick. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick this as my dailies for audio. So this is going to do a bunch of stuff here. I can see I've got some time code. I've got some names in here. It's pretty interesting. I can go ahead and hit Q to that. And that's going to throw that right in here as well too. So there's my O1 color panel. Notice that that's ready. And if I let this sit, this will actually finish rendering here. And then as soon as this is finished rendering, this one will start rendering. In the meantime, I can set aside where I'm going to go ahead and put this. So maybe I'm going to put this on my desktop as well. So as soon as this one is finished here, this next one will finish automatically. And again, I can continue working. To the top right, we have our preset browser. Now, you've probably been in Premiere before, and if I'm going to export something here, so we have our format, and then we have our preset browser. Notice we don't have a whole lot of presets that we can export to. In fact, most of these are fairly useless for when I'm actually rendering something. I've made a few separate presets here, and these are my custom ones here that I've created. That's why they're separated here. So how do you go about creating a preset? Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about formats and presets. Our format is what you can think of as almost like a box. So if I have a .mov, that would be a QuickTime file. If I have an AVI, that would be a Windows media file, or a WMV. I can have an MPEG-2, which would be for DVDs. That's slightly different than the MPEG-2 DVD in the way that it renders. I can also have an H.264, or I can have an MP3. Notice if I click MP3, it's just audio, because that's the kind of format it is. Now, if I go under QuickTime, there's lots of different flavors of QuickTime I can have. So as soon as I've clicked QuickTime here under my video panel, you'll notice I have all these different codecs available. All right, there's quite a few of them there. I guarantee you'll be using almost 3 or 4 of them on a consistent basis. Other than that, you probably won't be using a whole lot of them. So let's just jump right back into the Adobe Media Encoder, and you'll notice that there's some more system presets in here. In fact, there's a ton of different presets in here. I have stuff for audio only, broadcast, camera, cinema, etc. So you may be asking yourself, why do we have all these different presets? Why are there so many? Many of them are just the same presets with different sizes. They may be the same format and the same codec, but a slightly different frame size to accommodate different screens. And some of them may have different audio codecs and different bit rates for different bandwidth concerns. So again, the only thing I can think about having these different presets would be if I was creating something for the Nook, I would think to myself, well, what the hell size does it have to be? And I'm going to say, okay, it's going to be 1024 by 600. Now, here's the drawback about something like that. I'm just going to plop this on this, working with 120 here really quick. If I go ahead and I click this, I'm going to get 1024 by 600. And notice that's the size it's going to be. Even though I just put it out at 1080p, it's going to fit for the most part. So it's really easy for me. And notice I was just able to drop another one right on there, right on top of my Premiere Pro project file. And it's ready. It's going to start cranking away as soon as this one's done. To go back to my conversation here, what if we needed to create specific outputs for different people? So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to open up another project here. I've got this big project I'm working on. All right, so I've got another project open here, and like I said, I want to be able to send out a couple different copies to different people. I want to send one to my friend Emily so she can review the different shots and make sure that everything's looking the way it's supposed to be. So I'm just going to, again, hit Command M here. And just going to go ahead and look at my different presets, right? So right away, I have a couple different formats and presets. Now let's take a quick little tour of this, since this is identical to what we have in the Adobe Media Encoder. If I go to any one of these and I want to create a preset, or if I come up here to create a new preset, they're going to be identical. The reason why I'm going to show us in Premiere is so that we actually have a screen, so that way we can see what's happening. If I create this in the AME, it's not going to show us the screen because it's not going to have any information that it needs to render. So we have our match sequence settings, and if I click that, you'll notice what it's happening here is our sequence setting is at 1920 by 1080, and it's going to push it out at 1920 by 1080, overall quality 50, blah, blah, blah. It's going to use a video codec of an MPEG iframe, which is not necessarily what I want. I almost never use this match sequence setting, so I'm just going to unclick that. And under my format here, more often than not, I'm almost always going to be working with QuickTime when I'm going out of Premiere. There may be times that I just want TIFFs. There may be times that I'm going to go right to an H.264. But for our purposes right now, I'm just going to hit QuickTime. And we have our presets. And again, these are the presets that I had set up and some that are included with Premiere Pro. If I go ahead and I change my codec, so again, we have all these different codecs here. And which one is the right one for you? Well, it depends what you're doing. Again, we have not that many. We have this XD cam, which has all these different flavors. We have a couple uncompressed at 8 and 10-bit. That's a pretty big difference, actually. We also have our MPEG IMX, again, at different bit rates. HDV, DVC Pro, DV, a bunch of Avid, and a bunch of ProRes. For our purposes right now, I'm just going to hit H.264. And the reason why I'm hitting H.264 is because it's going to be a fairly small render for me to send over, right? And so I'm going to send this over to my friend Emily, and she just needs to check the scene here, make sure my shots look good, make sure all my ridiculous vegetable puppets here are exactly what they're supposed to be and how they're supposed to look. So underneath our export video and audio here, we have our summary, and our summary tells us basically about what it's going to output as. And all our output here is a combination of everything that's in these tabs and in the settings here. Now, check out some of these tabs that we have here. Under effects, I can actually apply different looks that I've created or that are included in Premiere and in After Effects. So if I have a specific lookup table that I want to use, that's usually referred to as a LUT or a Lumetri look, I can actually put that in here. If I have a specific one that I've gotten from somebody else, I can go ahead and actually import that right in here as well too. It's great though, if I need to create an overall look on something, I can just click that one button and it's going to apply it almost like an adjustment layer across my whole scene. Now, I don't necessarily like doing that because I like to have control over every one of my scenes, but that's what that does. So I'm going to click this image overlay, and I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to put a logo right on my footage here. So I'm going to grab this nice little logo. I've got some alpha channels in there, and I'm going to put that right in the bottom right corner. Notice I can also set the size on here too, so I can scale that down and even change the opacity. So if you're wondering how a lot of people would get those fancy dancy watermarks on there, that's one way you can do it, is just do it outside right in here in the Adobe Media Encoder and set it up as a preset. Pretty awesome. Now, again, I'm going to send this to Emily, so she's going to be reviewing my footage, so I'm just going to say name overlay, and right now it's just saying the source file name. I just want to give this a prefix and a suffix. So I'm just going to say review copy, and that's my prefix, and my suffix is going to say Emily. And now that is very clearly going to be the review copy for Emily, and I like to leave my stuff near the bottom. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that in the bottom center here. And we'll make that just a little bit smaller. All right, very good. Now, one other really useful feature of creating these different presets is a timecode overlay. And I'm going to go ahead and hit this timecode overlay. Right now you can see they're butting up against each other, and that's okay. I'm just going to pull this one down. I'm not too worried about safe frames or anything like that right now because this is just for review anyway. And the reason why I really like having timecode overlays for when I'm sending things off to review is so that way when I get my notes back from my boss or whoever's giving me my notes, they can refer to the actual timecode in the footage right away instead of just giving me some arbitrary documentation of, hey, change the color of this one thing here. That doesn't do me any good. But if I give them a timecode that they can pause, that's going to help me out. And then lastly down here, we've got a time tuner. Now this is pretty new in Premiere Pro as of 2015. And what this does is it lets me actually change the duration of 10% plus or minus. So I can actually speed this up or slow it down exactly 10%. Now why 10%? Why not 30? Why can't I just change this duration to, maybe 5 minutes? The way the time tuner works isn't really like the rate stretch tool. The rate stretch tool will just compress frames and speed them up, a lot of times adjusting the pitch as well, unless you change that manually, or it'll double it up and give the illusion of slowing it down. The way this time tuner works is it actually analyzes your footage as it's playing back, and if there's any silent channels with still frames, if there's no audio playing at a certain point in time where there's actually still frames, then it's going to remove that footage wherever it can to get to this new duration change. Now, I believe if you do add time to it, if you go into the positives here, it will work like the rate stretch tool. I wasn't able to find any more documentation on that, but I found it very interesting that it'll actually remove those frames from the audio and the video if there's just still frames or empty channels. Now let's go to our video. Emily doesn't necessarily need to see every single pixel. So what I can do is I can just make this 1280 by 720. Notice that it automatically scaled, And I don't have any letterboxing or pillar boxing. And that's because we have this aspect ratio lock here. If I unclick this, I can drag this left or right, and that's where we're going to get our letterboxing. That might be useful if you really want to create something very cinematic, but you're going to have a window frame that's this big, and chances are it's just going to look like garbage. So unless you have a specific aspect ratio, chances are you want to stick with something that's going to be in the 16 by 9s or in a 4/3. We can also change our frame rate in case we need to conform it to something else, and its field order. So if we have something that's an interlace, we can force a progressive or vice versa. If we're working with anamorphic footage, we can actually change that here as well. We can change the pixel aspect ratio. Lastly, if we want to go a little bit more detailed with how things are going to work as far as our codec, we can assign our keyframes and our bit rate. Now, again, that goes a little beyond what we're talking about here today, but basically the higher the bit rate, the bigger the file size, but the better it's going to technically look. Not always the case. I don't want to ever say always because someone's going to write in a comment, that's not true because of blah, 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 blah. But for the most part, we just have more information. When we have more information, things typically look clearer. So we'll move on to our audio tab. Just like we have video codecs, we have audio codecs, and we can specify exactly what kind we want. More often than not, you're going to be using uncompressed or AAC unless a sound guy tells you otherwise. We also have the option of, if we're putting out specific kind of files, to actually have a sidecar caption file. So this is great for ADA compliance. And then lastly, we have publish. Now, if I want things to go to YouTube right away so that way Emily can get to it and I can just post it to her own account, I can actually click this, log in, and make it unlisted, give it some tags and the descriptions. I can also do the same thing with Vimeo and log it in. What's great about that is if I'm sending things to multiple channels like I do for these tutorials specifically, I like to put it out to both YouTube and Vimeo at the same time so they both go live. That's really useful for me. We also have Creative Cloud down here. I never use this. Lastly, I have the FTP down here. And this is great because I can send things directly to a specific site for hosting once I'm done with the project. So if after I have everything written off, everything like that, I might want to send this right to the cable company or the television studio that I'm going to send things to, and they give me a login, and there it is. It's done, and it's beautiful. Great. So now I've created this preset, and I can go ahead and hit Q, and I'm done with it. It would be terrible to have to set this up every single time I wanted to send something off. So what I can do is I can click this button right over here and save this preset. I'm just going to say review, copy, 720p for Emily H264. Whoops, that's 364. That's in the future. And I can save my effects and my publish settings. So my effects settings, if you remember, were this text dialog, and my publish settings would be the YouTube, the Vimeo, etc. So I'm just going to save the effects settings and hit OK. And now I can go ahead and hit Q. Now I want to make a second copy that I'm going to send over to my friend Todd, who's doing a bunch of audio work for me. So I'm going to go back into this, right? So I've got a bunch of these other ones. I'm just going to remove these other ones that we were working with before. So there's my simple rod removal. If I click this right here, that's going to pull up that same dialog box that we just saw. It's just pulling up the media now. And it's all right there. And if I want to make a second copy of this for my friend Todd, Todd doesn't necessarily need to see a great quality of the video. He just needs to be able to see the video so that way he can add in his audio. So I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this. And I can do that by just hitting this button here or Command D. And that's going to duplicate that. And now that I have that, I'm just going to go ahead and click this button here, and it's opened up the same thing we just saw before. And what I'm going to do this time is I'm just going to change some of my settings here. So I'm going to make sure that this isn't at 90. I'm going to set this down to maybe 30% quality. And I'm going to shrink this down quite a bit, maybe to about 800, maybe even 750. by 422. And I'm going to go through and just make sure everything else is checked here. So I don't necessarily need keyframes or one of those. And I can limit my data rate to maybe 3,000. All right, so that's going to be much smaller there overall. In fact, I'll make that even smaller there. See how that's going to look. All right, that's good enough for me. And now, this obviously isn't a review copy for Emily. This is going to be my review copy for Todd. Sound mix. There we go. Review copy, Todd, sound mix. And I'm still going to go ahead and I'm going to put in that time code because it's super important for me working with audio engineers and sound designers to get the assets from them, and then they can leave me notes and tell me exactly where things need to kind of go. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say we're going to call this one the sound mix. And I'm going to put that right on my desktop as well. And I'm going to save this as a new preset. Everything else is the same for the most part here. We have our effects, video, audio, etc. The only thing I really changed was the frame size and the quality. And I'm going to go ahead and save this as a preset. I'm going to say review copy Todd sound mix. And I'm going to make sure I have my effects settings. And I'm going to hit OK. And now I hit OK here, and you'll notice I have two separate pieces here. And in my presets here, I've got my review copy 720 for Emily and my review copy for Tad sound mix. And right away, I can see the frame size, 1280 by 720, 750 by 422, my frame rate based on source, and if I had any comments in there. I'm just going to click on this output path and make sure that this is on my desktop. All right, so I'll just hit play and start my queue, and automatically it's going to start pushing those out and putting them into whichever folder I specified them in. So that's the majority of the Adobe Media Encoder. The only other thing I didn't talk about is this window right down here, this watch folder. Now this watch folder is really awesome for a couple different reasons. One, if I'm able to have another computer that I'm not really using right now, I can actually send renders from one computer to another, and anytime things go in there, it's going to start rendering. So what exactly am I talking about here? Well, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my other machine so we can kind of take a look at exactly what's happening there. So bear with me here. You're going to see an identical kind of setup, but it's going to be on a different machine. All right, so now I'm on my other machine here, and you can see it looks identical to what we were just looking at. And the only thing that I'm going to do differently here is set up our watch folder. So what I'm going to do is just put a watch folder right onto my desktop. So I'm just going to say watch folder for the MacBook Pro 8 core, and I'm going to choose OK. Now, right away, it defaults by putting on a specific preset on here. This may or may not be the one that I want, and that's okay. But what if I want to get those other presets that were on the original machine? You'll notice that here, I don't have those same user presets. That can be a problem if I'm working with other people in a team and everyone makes their own preset. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back to my original computer here. And I'm going to take these two presets that I've created, and I'm going to just select them both by clicking one, holding on to Shift, and clicking the second one. And I'm going to actually export these presets. And what that's going to do is it's going to take my frame size, my format, my frame rate, all the different pieces that go into making my preset and bundle it together. So again, I'm going to take both of these, and I'm going to export these presets, and it's going to ask me where I want to put them. I'm going to go ahead and connect to that other computer here, and I'm going to put it right onto that desktop. So let me just go to Stanislaw here and watch folder on MacBook Pro, and I'll hit choose. Now you'll notice I already have some in here. That's because I've placed them in here already. So I'm just going to hit OK. It's going to ask me if I want to replace it. I'm going to skip that for right now because I already have those, and let's go back to this other machine. Now, how can I import some of these presets? Well, you'll notice that I've got this button right here that says Import Preset. I have my import and export, or I can right click and import my preset. So I'm going to do that now. So I'm going to go right back to that same folder I was just in. And there's my review copy for Emily, review copy for Todd. So I'm going to select both of those, hit open, and now both of those exist on my other machine. Now this is why it's so great. This other machine is a lot speedier. This is an 8-core, it's got a great GPU card, and what I can do is specify certain codec to be in here, and I'm going to just go ahead and remove that one. And now I have this review copy for Todd. Well, maybe I need this one to go somewhere else. So I'm actually going to go ahead and just say review copy, and I'll go to second editor. I'll go to review copy and I'll write second editor. All right, so what this means now is anytime anything gets put into this watch folder on this other machine, it will automatically start rendering anything that's in that folder and pump it out wherever I want it to. So in this case, I'm going to give it an output. I'm going to put this watch folder, I'm going to say second editor copy. This doesn't have to be on a local machine. This could be on any network machine. I do recommend that you don't use Wi-Fi for this. It'll kill your bandwidth. And so I'm just going to place that there. Notice it says custom. And now anything that I put into this watch folder on MacBook Pro will automatically edit there. So let me go ahead and I'm going to take this guy here. Let's stop this render for right now. All right. And I'm going to remove that guy. And now this time, right now, it's doing a review copy for Todd. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to make sure that the output for this is on the other machine. So I'm going to connect to that other machine and go to my desktop, watch folder. And now anything that goes in here is going to automatically render. So I'll hit that. And for our purposes right now, I'm going to just turn off the effects here. I don't want that name overlay. And the reason for that is if I encode this with that name overlay and timecode overlay, it's going to do that once. And then once it goes to the watch folder, if you remember, on this machine here, it has its own review copy second editor stuff. So there's things to be aware of when you are using this. So I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to put in a fairly big file here. This is about 5.87 gigabyte file. This was originally done in ProRes 4444, and I just want to push out 2 separate copies of this. So I'm sending this to the watch folder on the second machine here. Now, a couple things to note. If you are using watch folders, you need to have the Adobe Media Encoder running in the background on the other machines. So if I was sending this to a machine that didn't have the Adobe Media Encoder turned on, but inside of it, it had watch folders, it's not going to do anything because the program itself isn't running. So a lot of times I'll actually have the Adobe Media Encoder running from startup. So that way, as soon as anything goes to it in the morning, it will start rendering. Additionally, there are some times where things can get a little buggy. So for example, it will just fail on a certain encoding. A lot of times then I'll just do a restart and that seems to clear it up. I don't know if it's a bug with the current versions that are out there, but I'm hoping that it clears up fairly soon. Okay, so now we're in my second machine and you can see that it's already encoding the 2 different versions at the same time. So one is going to be the review copy for Todd's in the sound mix, and then one is going to be a 4K copy. The point is, the reason why this is useful is now this is all taking place on a separate machine that completely frees up this machine here. Notice this one has its own renders that it's doing, but this machine can crank away and put together other stuff too. So I've basically created a domino effect of my editing. So if I need one copy to go to archival and then a smaller version to go somewhere else and an even smaller version to go into email, I can do that. A lot of times I'll make a really small version and upload it to my Dropbox folder. And that way I can view it after it's done rendering right on my phone or at my home computer, anywhere that I'd like, and I can still review it to make sure that everything came out exactly the way I want. So that's the power of the watch folders. So that's about it for our Adobe Media Encoder. Hopefully you found this useful and you can use this to speed up your renders and work on multiple projects at the same time. Again, my name is Stanislaw Robert Liberta with AV Ultra, and I will see you next time.